Hello and welcome to the Project Hope podcast for families and friends with a loved one in a group of high demand, high control. I am your host, Jennifer. A lot has changed since I first started this podcast, so I thought I'd add a little to the initial introductions and provide something that's more up to date. I work with survivors of coercive control one-to-one. I also consult with families, and I offer education to the public around such topics. For the full scope of what I offer and also my credentials, you're welcome to check out my website, jennifer-french.com. I have a master's in the psychology of coercive control, and as of August 2024, I've been accepted into a PhD program called Psychology, Policy, and Law, and I'll have a specialty in either criminal behavior or forensic victimology. This will support the work that I currently do as an expert witness in cases involving coercive control. The Project Hope podcast has provided such an amazing opportunity for me to meet many wonderful people, survivors, experts, family members, and it's truly a pleasure to meet each one of these individuals you will hear from. This podcast will conclude with season 2 as I enter into my PhD program, but I have many other exciting things on the horizon, so please stay in touch and go to my website for any and all current events. Thanks to all of you who listen to Project Hope and care about this community. Welcome, everyone, and today I am so happy to welcome you all to the Project Hope podcast with Pamela Dyson. She was also known as Premka within the Kundalini Yoga community. She released a book at the beginning of 2020 called Premka, White Bird in a Golden Cage. And I happened to find out about it earlier this year as news began to hit the Kundalini Yoga community and send those who were devoted to that practice into really a need for reflection and evaluation of truth and personal integrity. I can relate personally to many of Pamela's experiences of inner turmoil while trying to love and follow a guru, as I experienced as well. But I am also connected to this story as a certified Kundalini Yoga instructor myself. Because of this, I've had the privilege of being a part of this community as this story and the heartbreak of many people having to face this truth evolves and unfolds. Pamela's introduction to Yogi Bhajan happened shortly after he had arrived in the U.S. from India. During that first encounter, which was a quote-unquote interview, and then a semi-private yoga class, during which Pamela states that Yogi Bhajan placed his hand on her breast. She would become one of his highest-ranking officials, and she would live in the same house with him as well as others in service to him. In 1971, she would have a dangerously close brush with death as she began to hemorrhage while sitting next to the guru on a plane due to an abortion that she had received in India at the behest of Bhajan, wanting to abort their unborn child. During his life, Yogi Bhajan apparently stated that he was celibate and promoted arranged marriages within the organization, resulting in a message of celibacy for his students unless they were in a committed relationship. Yogi Bhajan himself was married and remained so while having sexual relations with many of his students. Pamela attended to Yogi Bhajan and remained at his side during the earliest years of service to him and to the organization at large. She became the administrative director for the international headquarters of the 3HO Foundation and the Sikh Dharma International as the first Secretary General for the International Ministerial Council of Sikhs, also called Khalsa Council. Some of you will be more familiar with that term. She also helped edit and translate the Sikh daily prayers and many of the texts that served the organization and Yogi Bhajan. This Yogi Bhajan part of her life journey took place from 1968 at the age of 25 through the 80s when she left at the age of 41. Of course, her story does not stop here, and we will be addressing some of the aftermath during our interview. But please read her book to know more. One of the things I loved most about Pamela's book is how much of the experiences are shared through actual dialogue with Yogi Bhajan. Through this, we get to experience the nuances and flavor of manipulation with power. Although Pamela is very clear about her vulnerability from the very beginning, combined with her true seeking of a guru and other factors, her story is not uncommon, and I believe it will be very helpful for us to take a deeper look at why one might tolerate abuses or violations in a holy environment versus everyday life circumstances environment. So that said, we will jump into the interview, and I extend a huge and heartfelt welcome to Pamela Dyson. So, welcome. I'm so glad to have you here on the Project Hope podcast, and it feels like a very special treat to be with you today.
Oh, thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah. So, Pamela, I know, kind of diving right in, we had the opportunity to have a small chat prior to this. And during that time, I know that you have kind of a desire or a little bit of inspiration to sort of explore this question around why we as women might give our power over to somebody who's kind of a guru figure, but in the real world, we might actually have clearer boundaries while at work or perhaps in a partnership, kind of everyday life. And that this was something that I was looking forward to discussing with you just in terms of kind of young women and a message for young women. I mean, I always feel like when we're speaking about these kind of high control, high demand environments that, in particular, I'm always thinking of this younger generation, you know, even people who are in college. And then certainly when one gets out and we're all kind of floating in this new world of whatever our lives may be. And so I wondered if you could speak a little bit about your kind of Warner Brothers experience and just having had that experience and then kind of going right into your experience with Yogi Bhajan.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting contrast because I had moved on my own, knew virtually only one person in Los Angeles, and when I was in my early 20s. And I kind of shifted from working in a banking atmosphere to, well, let's do something more glamorous. You know, it is Hollywood after all. So I was a secretary. And at that time, that was a decent profession career. And I ended up, I forget how, but I ended up at Warner Brothers Record Company. And that really was right in the heart of Hollywood. In terms of the mindset and the expectations and the assumptions. And I just went in there at the age of, 24, 25, and saw that I was working as an executive secretary on the executive floor. And the president's office was right next to mine. He had to walk by my desk every day. And I came to discover that the expectation, which wasn't really stated openly, but the expectation was that the attractive secretaries intermingled, let's say, with the married executives. I said, what? And I didn't participate. I didn't play the game the way it was expected of me.
It wasn't in the job description?
No. But there was that concept of what was it called? The couch, the casting couch. Yeah. I don't know if you know that one. It's like, you got to sleep with the producer or the director or somebody to get your opportunity in Hollywood. Well, I mean, I wasn't into any of that. So I had really, clear, strong boundaries to a certain, extent. But it was shortly, and I was also going through a divorce. Yeah. I had been in a short 2-year marriage and going through the trials and tribulations of sorting your life back out and finding yourself again. And it turned out to be a little bit ugly and painful and disappointing and shocking. And so I was vulnerable. And I really went looking for a spiritual teacher. I kind of perceived that at the age of now 25, my chances for married life and family were over. It was done. I was too old. And I was raised in a really, with a lot of Christian influence in my childhood and my years of family. But I'd rejected Christianity. I was totally, that mythology didn't make sense to me. It didn't fit. I couldn't accept it, but I was spiritual and idealistic. So the tendency of the time of those, 60s and, the Beatles going to be with Maharishi in India and, the songs, the music, the energetic was all towards the East. Yeah. And so I wanted a spiritual teacher. And I want, it was to be someone who was going to guide me. So I think that the mistake I made was, first of all, I didn't have a good self-concept. Yeah. I didn't have a good sense of my worth, my value, my a knowing, an inner knowing at all. And that's really the thing that we need to be going after, is self-knowledge, is self-awareness. And it's, we get some of that through therapy, we get it through various ways, but I would say mostly it's meditation. It's that, that settling down and spending really one-on-one time with your inner world and in nature. Yeah. Nature was a big one for me. But when I pursued someone outside of myself who could tell me more about who I was than I knew.
Yes.
The right way to live. I thought it was like going into a convent in my mind. I was going into a disciplined path. And so it just being in the presence of somebody with a tremendous amount of charisma and power gives you it gave me sort of a shock. It was like I lost touch with me. Not that I ever really, really had it, but it's the difference between being around, the Hollywood glamour scene that was kind of, what that is, sort of. Yeah. But being with somebody who, a spiritual teacher, we put spiritual into a realm of things we don't really know or understand.
That's such
and we're looking for somebody to tell us what it is, how it works. And just the very terminology, spiritual, what is
Right.
But we are, we are beings of spirit, and we need to learn how to honor that, recognize that within ourselves, and connect to it. But what these spiritual teachers and guru types, and even ministers, it's in the Catholic Church, it's everywhere.
Right.
As soon as a male-dominated profession, let's say, is contacted, we come into touch with that, we become childlike. It's like, okay, daddy, you're going to tell me who I am and how to live and how to do it right. And in order for me to understand or take that in, I'm going to have to completely trust in you.
Yes.
Just wrong.
Right. Right. But what I think is so fascinating about that point is that in some ways, to enter into the spiritual, really there is that kind of childlike quality that one needs. So it's sort of the natural state of entering there, and it makes individuals so vulnerable in these spiritual communities.
Absolutely. And and not knowing enough in that particular era of time.
Yes.
Mid-60s, just think about how long ago that was.
Yes.
That's 50 years ago. And
I mean, the women's right to vote had
just barely happened.
Right.
And we didn't have the internet, we didn't have Google, we didn't have cell phones.
Yeah.
How you were learning about the world was very direct. You didn't have a resource for explaining or guiding or learning more about or anything. You just were. And so I would say for young people, so much of what our culture directs us to is the external. We're hooked on the internet, we're hooked on technology, we're hooked on our cell phones, we are hooked outside of our beings. You just got to turn it off and take it back and actually sit on the cushion, sit on the mat, self-reflect. Self-reflect includes an inner inquiry.
Yes.
And you answer your own, the inner wisdom that we actually have will guide the inquiry to, it'll often come into contact with deep emotional wounds, pain. And what I learned eventually was that those are very ripe places for inquiry. I'm feeling this big sadness or this huge anger or this rage or pain, whatever it may be, to learn how to stay with it. I think that people are so quick to change the channel, to move through, let's look in on this source of whatever, get on a video, get on something to distract ourselves. So it's learning to stay with ourselves, learning to honor ourselves, learning to listen and witness. And it's like we know a concept of our inner child. Well, that's a lot of where you have to find your inner child is in here. You got to listen to her, her pain, her grief, her sadness, her wound, her whatever, in order to hold her.
Yes.
And heal her. and forgive her and love her. All of those things we really have to do. It's an inside job. We have to do it for ourselves. We're looking for love literally in all the wrong places because we're looking for it outside ourselves.
Yes. And it's so lovely to hear you speak about that internal process and that internal world, because I think especially around that age when we are just kind of waking up, we've got our intellect on board, we've got our personality really kind of gelled in certain ways. I think in the pain or the struggles at that age, there's such a temptation to run away. And now, of course, as you mentioned, with the internet and the access that we have to distraction 24/7, it's so easy to go there. But it's really, I know for myself, and it sounds like this has been your experience too, it really is when I have had the courage to look at the things that I don't really want to look at, that is where the insight comes. And then not just the insight, but Pamela, I think the other thing that I'm so glad that this is kind of coming out more and more, I think in this era, especially with the work of Brené Brown, but really not being in shame and guilt. And those are things that are so easy to go to. And I think it really keeps us from healing because we're not going to look at things out of shame or guilt. And it's like, just bollocks to that. Can we just blow that apart, please? Because what are we afraid of? In the end, it's really just us. Yeah. So, yeah.
It's our self-judgment. What I found in the work that I did for like about 4 or 5 years with the diamond work was to begin to understand what they call the construct of the ego mind, and to understand the nature of the mind. The mind is a tool. It's meant for us to be the master of, but we become the subject. We become subjected to the judgments that get hurled at us via this mental montage that we carry around all the time. And you've got a judge in there, you've got a critic in there, you've got a spiritual superego in there, you've got all these entities, you've got your little child, you've got all these voices. And along with everything else that comes at us from the outside, we tend to give it power.
Yeah,
it becomes a tyrant.
Yes.
It can be a tyrant. And so what I learned in the diamond approach was to step back from when that voice, when that judge, when that critic, when that distracting rapper comes in, you got to recognize it and say, oh, that's you.
Yeah.
That's that judge. That's that critic. You can go away now. I have work to do. I don't really want to listen to this right now, or whatever you need to do, but you've got to step back enough to identify it. And that's where the whole practice of meditation comes in.
Yes.
You become literally mindful of the mind activity. You become aware of the mind activity and learning to separate who you are from the mental activity of your mind. We get convinced that we're that mental activity that, we're not. Yes. We're the spacious, underlying emptiness, vastness, void, whatever you want to call it, love that underlies all of that. That is just, in many ways, it's just static.
Yeah.
And we need to disarm the static, because the static, we get into patterns with the static. We get into patterns of constantly beating up on ourselves, believing that judge, believing that critic, having really poor self-esteem, having really poor self-image, and then pursuing everything that can help us overcome that impoverished self-image.
Yeah.
And so it's a what do you call it? An endless vicious cycle.
Right.
So really the big thing that we need to get a hold of is recognition of the various entities that live in our mental world.
Yes.
And to disidentify with that mental activity as a whole conglomerate. It's like, oh, that's not me.
Yeah.
I am this silent, spacious, huge emptiness that underlies that activity. And that's been my biggest awakening, understanding, freedom, liberation. It's like, oh, that's that damn judge again.
Yes.
It's just trying to beat the shit out of me.
Right.
And why does it want to do that? You know why? What I figured out, what I believe, is the ego structure is sort of an entity. Yeah. And it is terribly threatened by the idea, by the possibility of death. Ego death. It is afraid that if you wake up, if you come into a greater awareness of what and who you are, that the ego will not be able to control you anymore. I mean, it's like the inner process is the same as the one we encounter in the world, There's somebody that wants to have control over us one way or another.
Well, Pamela, it's so fabulous to hear you speak in this way for a couple of reasons. One, I have to just mention that it's really enjoyable to hear you speak about the diamond approach and getting clarity through that, because actually the type of therapy that I predominantly practice with clients is called internal family systems. Mm-hmm. And it is really very same principles.
Yes.
That the way we work with families and the construct and all of that on the outside actually exists inside.
It's what's going on the inside.
It is. And and I think what I'm feeling also that is such a deep relief to me right now, speaking with you, because I find sometimes that when people have been in these sort of high control, high demand environments, there's also a tendency to potentially leave all of that behind and then be flailing afterward with maybe even no spirituality. And so, but most people are going into these environments because they want spirituality, or of course, people enter these groups for political reasons or other reasons as well, friendships and what have you. But whatever it is, that uniting force has something to do with something that's so core to us, our desire to unite with others or be in the same heart as others and be connected in that way. And then so many, I think, also who really want to truly know themselves and know God or spirit. Well,
yeah, my current definition of spiritual is self-knowing, it's self-awareness, self-realization, you could say, self-aware, it's hard to, use one terminology because they're all just words trying to describe the same thing, but I think what we're really seeking is that self within.
Yeah.
Is that true nature? Is that larger self? So it is an inner journey. It's just an inside process, and yes, and there's so many beautiful avenues, and internal family dynamics would certainly be huge,
Yeah.
because literally that outer dynamic both shapes and is a reflection of our journey that we have to go on.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Right. Because naturally, at some point, one needs to evaluate what was the mind that I was living in and grew up in. And do I now choose that or not? Because we all do grow up in the mind of our family if we're with a family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That it's very inspiring to also just hear kind of that wisdom, really, that I think also, as you were speaking, I was thinking about that age around when we're in college, when we're graduating from college.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I think we could say a huge generalization, but around that time, we're all in this space of kind of coming into ourselves. And I think some people really do have a drive toward the spiritual. I know that I did. I was sort of seeking that even when I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've actually seen is right now I have a lot of exposure to the young 20-somethings, kind of 20 to 25. And I am finding that there isn't even that kind of desire or language around the spiritual. And now that some of these young adults are encountering real life struggles, they are beginning to do that inner work. And it's interesting because I have been having conversations with my fiance about how really there just is a need for the spiritual, whatever you want to call it and however you want to label it. But
I think really, to me, the whole journey of life
yes,
is a spiritual journey. If you put it in the context of why am I here, which is the ultimate question, who am I and why am I here? Those were the ones that started my journey, and starts everyone's journey. Then it's all a spiritual pursuit. It's all a pursuit of how do I fulfill my highest purpose? What is my highest purpose? What is my place of service to all that is, to the higher good, whatever. I mean, it's like we're always really, I can't imagine not being in that process. And literally everything in your life provides you with the material. In Buddhism, I'm not sure exactly where this understanding or quote, I couldn't give a direct source, but it is said that this earthly realm, is a realm of suffering.
yes,
Which sounds horrible,
right,
but it's the truth. It's a realm in which we actually learn from suffering.
yeah,
And you have to. So in my particular journey, let's say, I thought I was going into this, and I did. I went into a beautiful community with a lot of beautiful idealisms and practices, and and we had this shining, charismatic, exotic leader, and then the disillusionment of abandonment and betrayal and the whole thing that I went through in my journey. I say at the end of my book, my real spiritual journey was only beginning after that was cut off, because the pain, the huge experiences of loss and disillusionment took me to myself, in a way that I hadn't appreciated my own inner sight and my own inner wisdom. And the way that I tell my story, you see that contrast where I'm questioning things that are happening, but I'm giving away my power to the person who's telling me what's happening instead of listening to my own intuition. So, in itself, the book sort of reveals the inner process of how we are on journey, spiritual journey.
Yes. And it also reminds me of how, that principle of that we learn through suffering. And then also, I think it was a Jesus quote of, I came to bring heaven to earth. And truly that's kind of the alchemical experience of meditation, right? Is that when we really do that self-inquiry, then we bring heaven into this earth, our body earth. And
yeah, absolutely. And the more, literally, it's the more of us who are awakening,
yes,
the more awake are what the collective will be.
yes,
the collective is the individual participation and how it grows,
Yeah.
Now here's a word from our sponsor.
I am happy to be aligned with Pure Haven, a company that is committed to pure, safe, and 100% toxin-free products for both personal care and home. To check out their offerings, please go to purehaven.com/Jennifer French. All proceeds will support the Project Hope podcast. The link is also included below with information about this podcast segment.
Now back to the pod.
And with that lovely thought, I do not want to turn us to politics in the United States of
Oh
America.
my God.
It's an interesting, yeah, thank you for that. So I also wanted to ask you a little bit about your story of leaving, and you kind of touched on it a little bit. I did note that when we spoke last time, you really did acknowledge kind of this extraordinary pain in the process of leaving. And I did want to ask you about that and kind of what that experience was and sort of the transition, because really, well, first, I'd like to hear about, because I'm sure family members and friends that have people in similar communities really care about kind of hearing what that breaking point is and how that breaking point happens. And I was very aware while reading your book that part of the story is this love that's forming between you and Siri Brahma. And that, yes, it sounds like that contributed to the leaving in some ways, but really I felt it's very clear that you had your own inner conviction that it was time.
Oh, yeah. No, I was clear that I could not continue to participate essentially with the corruption that I was witnessing. I didn't have a great understanding of the level of the corruption. I didn't have any, really. I just knew that, I think I spell it out in the book, that if this was required of me for my liberation, then I would forgo liberation. I could not participate.
Yeah.
And I would say my greatest self-love is for that, for that
All
recognition, for that knowing and that determination to not sell myself, my soul, my consciousness, my whatever you want to call it.
huge.
I could not do it. And I didn't even yet have words for or understand
Yeah.
the it that I was talking about, because I still, it was like there was a story, there was a mythology around everything that was going on. We were merging with the master. We were, it was like all of this great belief system that you try to incorporate to justify
Yep.
what's going on. But I finally said, I can't do it.
Yeah.
I can't convince myself that this is okay. I'm done. I'm over it. So I was going to walk away. It's just I had nothing to walk away with. I had not been paid a salary, so I did not have money. I did not have a car. I had given over everything I had 16 years ago, and so I had a car to drive, but that car was owned by Sikh Dharma. If I drove off in it, they could have me arrested for stealing,
Great. Yeah.
And I had pretty much really, really far separated myself from my birth family. I had nowhere, no one, no outer contact. So Siri Brahma was a big key, and I wasn't, using him. It was a mutual thing, but I'm very grateful that he was there,
Right. And sometimes I wonder, just the small gifts that perhaps we receive that help us to move toward the thing that's best for us.
Yeah. And we're still good friends. We still co-parent with our son. And, actually my current husband works for him sometimes.
Yes.
We are here on Maui. So it's, yeah.
Lovely. Yeah. Yeah. And then, so in the continuum of time here, so then what happens is you leave. And then I'm wondering, because this is not a part of your book, but of course it is on the blog on your site, about the lawsuit.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if you could just share a little bit about kind of that decision making and then some of the feelings and repercussions of that.
Sure. Well, first of all, we always refer to my departure from the continental United States as leaving, but in my perception, I was going to get married. I was separating away from Yogi Bhajan first, that personal thing, but I did not want to leave the community.
Okay.
And I was trying very hard to maintain a good relationship with him, to stay in service and to be a part of the whole community.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine that he would push me out of the community, but he did.
Yeah.
And in that, again, my eyes were being opened wider as I saw what he was willing to do to me. I saw what he was willing to do to this other woman who had come to him at the age of 14. And he himself telling me, oh, Kartapurk has left and she's claiming that I raped her and blah, blah, blah. And I knew that he had had sex with her, but I had no idea it was rape. I mean, he had, this level of his behavior was not anything I could have imagined that he would do. So, but he began to, he told me on that first description that, oh, she's making this up because her father sexually abused her. I know that's a lie. He's just making that up to cover himself. So all these things that were just like, oh my God. And and Sri Brahma was pushing and encouraging me to do a lawsuit, and I didn't really want to at all. But I finally, in witnessing what he was willing to do to Kartapurk, I said, well, I'll check it out, and I want to stand with her because the community would be more likely to believe her if I was standing behind her.
Beautiful.
And so that was, the driving motivation. It was never about money. I didn't really particularly expect that I would get any money. Yeah. I just wanted him to become accountable. And in fact, I thought, well, if he's justified in what he's doing, then he should be able to stand up and claim it.
Right. Yeah.
And, okay. So, as it turned out, we both reached out to the same person to explore legal avenues, and we came together just sort of fatefully, and we began the process of filing our lawsuits with the same lawyer, and we had the backing, etc. And what would I say? It just, in that process, YB was having heart issues and surgeries and or claiming to, or, I didn't ever know. It was all just drifting back to me. And, I once said to him, love doesn't go anywhere. And for me, I was still loving him.
Yeah.
I was still hooked, let's say.
Yes.
And I would say so the lawsuit takes me into basically a nervous breakdown. I mean, it's defined, it's like if you're crying all of your waking hours and can't, come out of it and can't think of anything else, they call that a symptom of a nervous breakdown. So in that sense, I went through a nervous breakdown.
Yeah.
Part of it was my compassion for him, that he was going through all this physical, stuff. And of course, I had come on as his great healer. So, that was really hard to know. And finally, actually, it turns out the Indian Sikh community really wanted this to go away. Just like the Catholic Church, it was reflecting very badly on them. So they just wanted to get Yogi Bhajan's exposure covered up, so get me to go away, get Kartapurk to go away, pay us off, stop all this, and let's clear the ugliness out of the way. So, at the point when they finally came to me for a settlement, I was just worn down and I was alone. Kartapurk had been, she had been disposed of by paying her off, and the person who was supposed to be funding the expenses with the lawyer had, stepped away. He wasn't there. So I was by myself, and I was felt really hung out to dry, and it was exceedingly painful. I literally felt in my body like I was burning at the stake.
Wow.
Brought back those old memories, whether it's true or not true. I felt like it felt like my skin was burning, like everything was burning.
Yeah.
And I had been demonized inside the communities. Everything was gone. So it was really rough. And
it's kind of a double heartbreak there, just the layers and layers that happen with that, the difficulty to even force yourself to do the lawsuit while feeling still a love and care for Yogi Bhajan. And then also the rejection from the community is just, you said that was the thing that you really wanted to keep or maintain.
Yeah.
It's just,
And so just the shock that he would be willing to trash me and to take that. But in hindsight, I realized he knew he had to do that to cover himself. He had to, I mean, that's what he did to everyone. Everyone who ever left, he painted a new picture of them.
Yeah.
They became, as soon as they had gone out the door, they had this flaw and that flaw, and they were these bad characters and everything. We had worshipped one another. We had put each other on different pedestals too,
right.
And because he did that. He did lots of hierarchical stuff where people were leaders in this and leaders in that, supposedly. But nobody really was, because YB always pulled the strings and controlled everything.
Right.
At any rate, so it was very, very heartbreaking.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry that you went through that. And yet, as you've said.
Me too. And yet it was a gift in the end.
Right.
So, yeah.
Amazing.
I mean, what else could have happened?
Right.
I would have stayed hooked. And what the book has done is brought so many of those people to unhook.
And this is what is so incredible, Pamela, about this story. I mean, I love that. I heard you in another interview say something like, well, I just moved to Hawaii and I didn't really realize how big the Kundalini Yoga community had even gotten.
Yeah, I didn't. I had no idea.
I've
been here, it's been 35 years since I moved here.
Yeah.
And the lawsuit was ended in 88.
Yeah.
So that's 32 years. And from there, I just had a life. I had a child. I had a husband. We were building houses, and life moves on, But in that process, I came to discover that my new partner had certain characteristics that were, he thinks
familiar.
Yes, he thinks he owns me. Oh, no. So as I began to resist and go through menopause, and I call menopause a pause on men.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah, it's like your hormonal hook suddenly shifts. Yeah. And what? He thinks, what?
Yeah.
I'm supposed to do what? No, go play. Go do your play thing and give me some time to myself. No, you have to play with me. You're my wife. You're supposed to do everything with me that I want.
Yeah.
Oh, God. So it ran its course. It had its time.
Yeah.
And like I said, we're still friends. We worked through things.
Right.
But it just, that coming into myself included, nobody else is ever going to define or direct or own me, have ownership over me, have rights over me.
Yeah.
So I think, again, that's a big one for us women, is to really, really get that frickin' clear.
Absolutely. And boy, is it a process. I mean, I really do think that this is why we hear so many women say, my 40s were the best years of my life, because it's sort of like it takes you 40 years to get to that place of, I know myself, I have my voice, I'm able to be the ruler of my domain. And sometimes longer, of course, but
yeah.
I mean, it's a continual process.
Yeah, for sure.
Go ahead.
No.
So, the other thing that really struck me, Pamela, and again, you have this as one of the links on your website, But there is, and I didn't write down this gentleman's name, but there is a beautiful letter that a gentleman writes to, I don't know if it's Khalsa Council, around the time post your lawsuit.
Tej, yeah.
Yeah, so I wondered if you would share a little bit about that, and then we'll go into kind of what's happening now. And the reason why I'm linking these two is really because you were a voice in the wilderness shouting out to this community that you loved.
Yeah.
And then even this gentleman did. And I just, you know, always in cases like this where there is sexual abuse, I mean, your heart just breaks to go, oh, all the people and all the lives and all the time that could have been saved, you know, the negative experiences that could have been saved.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Tej Steiner is the man who wrote the letter. He was known as Guru Tej, and he had been the head of Toronto in Canada. And he had moved to Toronto as a Vietnam War protester. He went up to Canada to, you know, it's like, I'm not going to go to some foreign country and kill a bunch of people I don't know. Why should I do that? So he moved to Canada, and then somewhere along the way, he came in contact with Yogi Bhajan, and that took 15 years of his life. But he is the only person out of the entire community that I can actually say took the step of reaching out to me.
Wow.
After it was actually after I had started the lawsuit. And he reached out saying, I think it was the only question was, is it true? And I said yes. And that was it for him. And I always just was so appreciative, and we're very close friends.
Yes.
As a result of that. I mean, we hadn't had a friendship before that, but it's built over the years.
Interesting.
And anyway, so he, in hearing from me that it was true, that's what inspired him to write a letter. And he sent it out to the whole organization on his own, that letter that said, if we don't address these accusations or these issues, then we are a cult. I think those were the words I think he put in that letter.
Good.
And it was completely ignored. It was completely buried. And he was gone just like I was gone. And he was slandered just like I was slandered. And it all went, you know, by the wayside. And the lawsuit itself, somebody ended up hosting it online in the 90s. But up until then, the people in the organization never bothered. They didn't know. They didn't check it out. They didn't have any access to the information. So all of that, he managed to keep it, you know, to keep it under control, to keep it covered. He had a team of lawyers with, you know, that were part of his entourage, his students, his people that he could have working for him for free, covering up his poop.
Yeah. Right. And so also what strikes me is the Tej Steiner letter, Pamela. It's so beautiful. Mm-hmm. It's just it's so balanced.
Yeah.
It's really calling on that community to say, let us be who we all believe we are.
Yeah.
And is there not room to question? That's all he really asks, that we need to be able to discuss and question with love in our hearts.
Yeah.
And so it really struck me that there was no real response to that there wasn't any awakening really from anyone. And it just shows you the power of these the mindset of the group and, of course, of the leader, because I'm sure there must have been some twisted story that YB could do around that.
Right. Yeah. It's really remarkably poignant and interesting that letter, like every other attempt, met with the same fate.
Yeah.
And that YB could control the dialogue and the response so thoroughly. And what I would say, this is interesting to me, which you might find very interesting too. I had no idea the impact my book would have. You know, I don't know, I had so much feedback to the writing, to the stories, to the content from my, writing group and people who had read it, was the source of the encouragement to put it out there. But I had no idea the impact it would have. And I would say that the reason that it did, this is really fascinating. Tej's letter met a certain fate. My book, because of the Me Too movement, for one thing, the timing, and the fact that there is this gigantic Kundalini Yoga community.
Yeah.
I mean, they say from the inside of, the organization, 10,000 Kundalini Yoga teachers have been trained by them. That's a lot of people, and that's a lot of students. I had no idea. But they're young, and they're not a part of the cult.
Yeah.
So before my book came out, they were knowledgeable about the fact that it was coming out. So what I have understood is that they spread the word like a good cult.
Yes.
This book is coming. Don't read it.
Wow.
It's just lies. Well, they didn't realize that their 20, 30, 40-year-old Kundalini Yoga teachers were not a part of the cult.
Yeah.
And they would have a different response to that directive. They didn't, they bought my book because they wanted to see what's the big hush hush here. And, so that was the difference. There was a different audience to my book that was huge and had a huge impact on the organization, because all of a sudden these Kundalini Yoga teachers who'd paid thousands and thousands of dollars for their certification are going, what?
Yeah.
You guys have covered this up, and this man was an abuser, like all the other yoga teachers are coming down,
Yeah.
So I think that it was just a huge impact because of their own miscalculation about sending out that word. I never did any publicity on my book.
Oh, how interesting.
Self-publicized from that.
Interesting. And so that's very interesting because you do know that I'm a certified Kundalini Yoga instructor, but and actually because of that, I was aware of your book. And it's very interesting because I think you're really right about that kind of new generation coming in. Of course, I got out of my cult. I had a few years of exploring experimentation. I decided to do the Kundalini Yoga teacher training at Golden Bridge in New York City. It was very powerful for me. Obviously, the yoga itself is really incredible in lots of ways. But I have to say that I had a very interesting experience during that time of course, I mean, we have to acknowledge that I also had a guru, a very, very similar style also to Yogi Bhajan.
Mm-hmm.
So I will never forget the way I kind of did life and spirituality after leaving that organization was just really that I need to be the one knowing what I'm doing, practicing what feels right to me. And there is no way that anybody will ever have any control over my spiritual life again. And so it was very interesting because there was, I think it was probably our third long weekend where they showed the first videos of Yogi Bhajan. And right away, that radar went up. It was the same exact flavor. And I just walked out of there saying, oh, hell no. I will never mention his name. I will never say a quote of his.
Wow, good for you.
I just kind of intuited that, but, based on experience, it's not like,
Right.
magic. But it was so fascinating for me to kind of watch others around and the mesmerization with this figure who, of course, at that time he had passed. But still that there really is this yearning, I think, for that mystical, foreign, unknown spirituality that yoga brings, and this leader. And so it has been kind of amazing for me to be almost on this, getting the emails and being in these communities on Facebook and really seeing what people are grappling with and struggling with. And that they're really, for some people, it's just so clear. And for others who really, I think, were part of the old guard, most of those who really studied under YB and knew him and all of that. I mean, really some of those people are obviously having a hard time and have really kind of not come to terms with it yet.
Right. No, it's 5 decades of indoctrination and belief, and and these personalities. He literally is a narcissistic sociopath or psychopath, depending on which definition you read.
Mm-hmm.
And they have these incredible skills to read their people, to compartmentalize what people experience of them and from them. And for people who never saw that other side, who even though there were times it was right in their face, wouldn't acknowledge or couldn't acknowledge it because they were very fully, indoctrinated into the other energy, the energy of. I watched a video of him recently with interacting with Suzanne, who's my moderator on the.
I saw that. Yes.
Did you see that?
Yes.
And when I watched her and I was amazed. I was so impressed with her.
Amazing.
But when I watched him, I realized I could hear this grating, controlling nastiness to his voice. But at the same time, there was this mesmerizing energetic that was moving through that I could also sense. And I went, wow, that's what it was. We got so lulled and seduced by a part of it that we didn't see the other part.
Yes.
And he just, and so the people who never had that other harsh experience of him or saw it happening, they blinded themselves to it, from it. It's 5 decades of indoctrination they have to try to sort through and figure out. And it's huge. I mean, it's taken me all these years to do my sorting.
Yeah.
And just imagine them trying to do it all at once.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think also it's interesting because it is so personal as you describe it. And then there really are so many layers that perhaps don't exist in other communities. Like, for example, the encouragement of those who were following Yogi Bhajan and very serious about it, for them to send their children away to India and to now be receiving the stories of this whole generation that really experienced abuse.
Terrible.
While they were there. Terrible. Yeah, and I think it's appropriate to say here that what has happened as a result of your book coming out is that people, in fact, do care. And there was an organization that was hired, a Buddhist organization, I believe, called an Olive Branch, who have now received anybody who wants to come forth. And so there are hundreds of these stories.
Yeah, well, they put out their report. They ended their collecting of information, I think, at the end of May or something.
Yes.
And then they came out with a report in August, September, and they concluded that, they're not there to do a legal investigation, but to do a independent intake of the stories of abuse. And they concluded that with the stories that they received, what they were able to counter about, check and authenticate in various ways, that it was very likely that he did all this abuse. I mean, who would make up the stories that are in that report? Have you read that report?
I have, yes. Yeah. It's horrible. Right.
Yikes. Yeah. Shockingly horrific. And, it's been such a mind-blowing eye-opener for me. I had no idea.
I cannot imagine what that must have been like for you. And I have wondered, what has been, what has your experience been having kind of blown up the Kundalini Yoga world and having people come forth? And have you had people kind of contacting you directly? Has it been able to be kind of a contained unit on this Facebook page and the Olive Branch, or what's that been like for you?
Oh, it's been my entire year. It came out in January, mid-January, my book, and it blew up so fast. There were people clamoring for it already, and I was surprised about that, and then it just, and the COVID social shutdown gave me a break.
Yeah.
I was just overwhelmed. And, I had to hire people to manage my Facebook because I'm temp illiterate, tech illiterate, because, I'm almost 80. I'm 77. I'm in a whole different ballpark generation. And I had no idea how to handle it. And I wanted to guide it to a positive outcome. I wanted the community to take an opportunity to heal, to come to terms, to recognize, to take care of victims, to get real, get to a new place, folks, because you've had your blinders on, and so it's, it is kind of turning out like that. But anyway, in that process, it was reactivating for me. It was, I didn't think I suppose I probably have been suffering some PTSD like a lot of other women in this process. And And I felt, it's like I'm a very empathic, sort of codependent type. It's like you get the start of the book where he's saying how, I'm the one who can, whose touch can heal him and blah, blah, blah. Oh man, did I buy into that one? And then, so, just to all of my empathic, codependent stuff, I think really, really came forth again. And somebody gave me the codependent mantra of, I didn't cause it. I can't control it. I can't cure it. Oh,
Yeah.
So I've had to remind myself of that frequently.
Yeah.
And of course, there is that part of feeling responsible for not having stopped it or not having participated in the very beginning or whatever,
Yeah.
and having to, keep confronting that in different ways that it comes washing over me.
Well, of course, and that's where that, not going with the shame and judgment where we can actually be compassionate on ourselves, right? Instead of the little girl, it's your 20 to 40 something year old, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so many, it's so easy to understand why you would be there, why you would leave, and why you would wonder certain things. But my goodness, I mean, life is such a complicated journey.
Oh, it's been so complicated. Yeah, it's been a trip.
Well, what a gift, Pamela, really. I mean, such a gift to that whole community. I feel like it's got to be a gift to yourself that you put your truth out there in that way. And my goodness, the result.
Yeah, I mean, on the other side of it, I have received so much appreciation and acknowledgement, and so many who feel so freed and so liberated. Especially or largely the Kundalini Yoga teachers and stuff, just really finding new ways to work with the teachings that they received and to own it instead of having it dictated to them.
Yes.
They found a whole new place, many, many teachers, of being with the Kundalini Yoga, and then so many women who spoke up and started telling their truth and can start to a new level of their healing process, and families being reunited in the recognition of what happened to their own children.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been quite phenomenal. And as I say, it's been overwhelming at many, many junctures. And
Yeah. Well, what strength you have come out on the other side with.
Yeah, I guess it's just, oh boy.
Well, right. Sometimes that's other people's perception and not our perception.
Yeah.
Right.
And then being in this lockdown with my partner, who was not a part of any of it.
Oh, yes.
But always encouraged me in putting the book out there. He came to me, his main spiritual involvement in historically was just Christianity. And he was pretty deep into Christianity with his former wife and stuff, but he somehow has been supportive and understanding, and yet locked down with somebody for 9 months.
Right, who's going through a massive process.
And here I am just melting down half the time, and yeah, it's been a trip.
Oh, I'm sure. Oh, Pamela, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. This has been very delightful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I will be in touch with you at some point soon.
Yeah, okay.
I will at times be using this time at the very end of the interview to just share some of my personal thoughts with you all and to sum up where I found hope, which may or may not be where you find hope, as is the case with all podcasts or lectures, lessons. Some will resonate with you and some won't. So I wanted to mention here with Pamela's interview that I felt as though she provided really thoughtful direction for especially the younger generation. But we addressed actively engaging in self-discovery and introspection. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which we all kind of learn about in psychology. And at the top of that pyramid, we see self-actualization, so the desire for self-fulfillment or to become actualized in what we are, our potentiality, and to be living the fullest of our potential. So there are many ways to get there. There are many paths that are spiritual, that are religious, that are self-helpy, that are therapeutic. So I always, of course, recommend being with somebody who is a trained counselor. In this field of spiritual abuse in particular, there are so many people who are highly educated and can provide the educational element of some of these group dynamics as well as the therapeutic component. So when you are choosing someone, I do recommend that you really resonate with them, and you can also research the type of therapy that they use because you may connect more to some modalities of therapy than you would others. But the right fit is out there. So if you feel that you're already in a relationship like this and it's not working that well for you, I highly recommend taking the courageous and sometimes difficult step of feeling like you're starting again from ground zero and finding someone new, because these environments can be extremely healing and insightful and helpful. And of course, that's what we all want for everyone. Pamela also mentioned in the podcast the diamond approach technique. I will provide a link for that for anybody who is interested. As a part of this podcast, I also want to allow for the spiritual to come into the discussions. Just because we have leaders of groups that are spiritually abusive, it doesn't mean that there aren't really good people out there who are teachers, priests, or leaders. And this is something that I hope to explore more in this podcast, and to even potentially be interviewing those that are in positions of power and exploring some of these topics of when we cross boundaries and how we remain safe in these dynamics that do have unbalanced power dynamics, typically right from the beginning. If you are looking for helpful resources, I do have a resource page on my website, so you are welcome to that. And please do be safe, educate yourself for yourself and for the next generation, and think critically, take heart, and be free.